Is it hyperactivity or do you just have a high energy kid? Let's dive into practical tips on how to identify and support your child. Hi, everybody. We're talking about hyperactivity. If you have a kid that is high energy, you might be wondering, is this a clinical problem like ADHD? So it's such a common thing for kids to be wigglers and need to move. And it doesn't mean it's a clinical problem. So let's talk about the difference between high energy versus hyperactivity. So high energy kids can put the brakes on when they need to. And when kids have clinical levels of hyperactivity, they have problems with transitioning. And of course, as I talked about, putting those brakes on. What does that mean? I always call it the Homer Simpson effect. It's a lot of, oh, doy, I shouldn't have done that. And that's what happens a lot with kids who are hyperactive. They are impulsive. There is an overlap between the two. And when it comes to ADHD, there are different kinds, and one of the subsets is hyperactive impulsive. You can be combined inattentive with hyperactivity and impulsivity. But when it comes to hyperactivity, kids are sort of like act like they have a motor and they can't pull back on that level of motor activity. And you find yourself all the time saying, stop, don't do that. Where when we think about high energy kids, right, these are kids that can transition well, they can listen in class. We're not always telling them to stop. They might be the kids that do like 3 sports on the same day. I know these kids and I'm like, holy cow, you have a lot of energy, right? But you know when to pull back, you know when to put the brakes on. And ultimately that's really what hyperactivity, when you struggle with that, you're missing that ability. So they're high energy kids need movement. And it does not mean there's a clinical problem, right? Because they know when to shift gears. So as I noted, hyperactivity can be related to ADHD, right? So that could be part of what's going on. Your brain is different, right? There's a level of neurodivergence. You're wired uniquely. But it also can be seen in many other clinical issues. In fact, hyperactive behaviors are seen with children that have experienced trauma. It can be seen with anybody experiencing a clinical mental health issue, whether it's long term or temporary, right? Grief, anxiety, depression, and any kind of situational stressors, right? If all of a sudden you see hyperactive behaviors and you are worried that your child isn't recovering well because their grandmother died, that could be complex grief, right? So if it's a new behavior, put your detective hat on and really think about why it's there, right? So let's talk about some of the root causes, some of the things that are, can bring this, whether it's a trigger, right? So we already talked about grief. We can talk about emotional stressors, a dysregulated nervous system. If your child is constantly moving towards this level of an activation, whether they're understimulated or overstimulation, right? Maybe it's environmental as one of the triggers, right? They're not sleeping properly. Their diet is bad. There are many reasons why nervous systems can get overactivated or underactivated. And kids that are understimulated can equally look hyperactive as well as overactive kids, just so you know. Kids who have low tone, kids that have low tone, hypotonia, hypermobility, they can actually either be sluggish and kind of sit around, or sometimes they're hyperactive. So there can be genetic and neurobiological causes related to the hyperactivity. And genetic doesn't just have to mean ADHD. You often see hyperactive behaviors in the history of individuals who later develop a mood disorder. Not always. Doesn't mean one equates to the other, but it's, as somebody who's done thousands of intakes, when I do our brain maps, you can always see that. And if you're interested in working with us on any level, you're going to go to drroseanne.com and you're going to .com/help, and you're going to take our solution matcher. It's going to guide you to the right solution for where you're at. So there are sensory issues can lead to hyperactive behaviors. I already talked about nutrient deficiencies, but actual specific nutrients, particularly things like those really essential ones, magnesium. I can't even tell you how many people take our magnesium and tell us that their kid is less hyperactive. It happens all the time, which is great because it is their nervous system is too dysregulated and it might be missing that nutrient. Foods and food allergies. So food allergies can cause hyperactive behaviors as well as reactivity in terms of things like sugar and food additives. These can lead to a lot of hyperactive behavior, surprisingly. And just making these changes, which are not easy, can lead to some very impactful things, which is always really exciting when you get to see things. People always feel like food is a long game. I'm telling you, it's not. You can sometimes see things. So when Max was reactive to dairy, he still is. He was like the Tasmanian devil. He was literally super hyperactive as a result of a dairy allergy, and a food intolerance to it. So you want to think about that. Also, a lack of nutrients can cause hyperactive behaviors. So if your kid's not getting enough nutrients, sometimes kids are sluggish, but sometimes you see hyperactive behaviors. So don't always run to the genetic. It's ADD. That's what pharma wants you to do. And unfortunately, too many physicians are not trained in this information and they're not taking it upon themselves to learn it because it's readily available. And you want to think about what else could it be. There are many triggers, right? And when it comes to hyperactivity, how it affects a child at home, it's hard. You're always managing, you're always saying stop. Your child's getting a lot of negative feedback, right? Kids with ADHD get 20,000 more negative messages in their life than kids that are neurotypical. And it really can affect family dynamics, especially when there is variability in behavior, because then you start arguing with your partner. Is this kid doing this on purpose? Or maybe they're like your partner, and then you're like, you do this, they do this, you got to stop. It just brings up a whole lot of things. I could say a lot more about this because I'm always supporting parents in our brain behavior reset program and our dysregulation solution. A lot of times it's about how do we come together? How do we manage it? And, you bring a lot of stuff to the table and you got to deal with your stuff too in order to, help your kid, right? What you're bringing to the table is going to help you to manage your dysregulated kid, whether they're hyperactive or unfocused or cry all the time, whatever's going on. You got to come to a place where you're regulated and you have some level of a core agreement. When it comes to school, right, these kids can be disruptive in class. They are having a hard time not just focusing but engaging in the learning, and that's really makes it hard. That as smart as some of these hyperactive kids are, they will fall behind. You can't just rely on your intelligence, right? And I think the hardest thing that I see that breaks my heart is that hyperactive kids have a hard time with peer relationships and making friends. I could see that with my own kid, at the time. So let's talk about practical tips, right? So whether you're a teacher or you're a parent or you're a caregiver, these are things that work. So first of all, kids that are hyperactive or kids that learn differently, they need structure and routine and consistency, right? So when you break out of structure and routine, when you are not consistent, it impacts learning. So as much as that feels like a hardship, teachers get this. They know they have that structure, the routine, so that even the kid who's challenged in learning can be like, I got it. It's in your schemata, it's in your framework, it's in your subconscious. You know when Mrs. Smith, pulls out the carpet, everyone just kind of comes and sits there, right? These are routines and structures that enhance learning, and the same can be replicated at home. I'm a big fan of a visual schedule, both at school and at home, but what you need to do with kids that are hyperactive, you need to preview it. You need to be clear about what the expectations are. Don't just say, my kid is 12, he should know this stuff. They're hyperactive. That means there's impulse control issues in there as well because they're just in movement all the time, right? We want to think about how can we positively reinforce the attempts to do the behavior and then the final behavior, right? These kids need a lot more reinforcement. This is not bribing. This is not a bad thing. It's what they need, right? And if it works and you can do simple positive reinforcement, praise, a little sticker, touch on the shoulder, something really simple can be so amazing. And you shift your language from criticism and correcting to reinforcing the behavior you want. And it's really a shift. And every parent can do this. Every teacher can do this. These are your favorite teachers because you're like, wow, that teacher's so kind. They're shifting what they're doing. They're not saying stop. They're saying, hey, come over here because we're going to get started. And and it alerts the child's brain and they just need more reinforcement. Calming methods and addressing sensory needs are critical, both at home and at school, right? Where does that kid have a place where they can let off some of this energy, right? When it's elementary school, it's easy. You can send the kid down with the milk carton full of books to get some sensory pressure and also to, let some energy out. At home, do you have a mini trampoline? Do you, when you're moving from a device to homework, are you doing a set of jumping jacks for 60 seconds? Like, you need physical kinesthetic movement to help that nervous system regulate. In the same breath, they need mindfulness-based activities. They need quiet areas. They can listen to music. They have to learn what it feels like to be calm. And teachers model that and parents should model that too. And so, take 10 minutes a day where there's no devices or not even in the room. You can turn down the lights, you can put some essential oils on, and maybe you're doing breath work or you're listening to an audiobook or a great podcast. But they need to know what it's like to regulate when it's calm. I think that's missing a lot. I think it's great to meet the physical needs, it's great to meet the sensory needs, but they also need to practice that really actively. And you know what? It's great for us, and it's also a nice connection. Specifically addressing any level of dysregulation. Hyperactive kids are often impulsive, and that means they probably feel things very strongly. There's more emotional reactivity. So that means that you have to explicitly teach them coping skills, self-regulation skills, and doing all of those things that they're building a repository of skills, particularly because, again, we're often telling these kids, stop, don't do this. So they're getting a lot of negative messages and they're not really sure what they should be doing. So teaching them skills to self-regulate, calming, coping skills to manage stress is really important, not just for today, but it is truly the key. Self-regulation is the key for lifelong mental health, right? And we're setting up our kids for mental health problems that are hyperactive because we're just negative, 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 negative. And I know we're having this conversation because you don't know, but I'm Dr. Rowe and I'm teaching you. So, but you can't just listen. You got to do it. You got to take action. I don't want to neglect things like nutrition and sleep. Our school systems don't really provide the right kind of nutrition. So you want to think about high protein, high fat, healthy fat foods for them, and not high levels of carbs that are, not, nutritious, white flour and, pizza. That's not going to help you at lunch. You want to give them the foods that are going to help power their brain, but in a calmer way. And the healthy fats and protein not only support neurotransmitters, they keep your blood sugars regulated. So that is truly almost like a non-negotiable. I think it becomes hard when your child maybe doesn't want to have those foods. Of course, during picky eaters, and you can go to our dysregulation solution. I have a whole program about picky eaters, having worked pretty much half of my kids that come into me are picky eaters, and it's something we do overcome. And there's no easy path, but there's a way to do it. And nutrition is, again, such a valuable asset, and I know it feels like a hurdle, especially when you got a kid when you're walking around saying, "Don't touch this, don't do that." But top takeaways today, right, is that this is not easy. This is not easy for your child. It's not easy for you. It creates a lot of conflict. We've got to regulate the nervous system. We have to think about, what does their nervous system need? What does their brain and body need? And what skills are they missing to help them self-regulate? And think about, what can you do 10 minutes a day to teach them to go into calm? This is great for you and it's great for them.